Instructions for configuring HA in VMware vSphere. Posted on September 14, 2023 by Dideo. When you have important virtual machines and critical services on their availability must be guaranteed throughout the operation of the business. One of the ways to achieve availability is to use a cluster to ensure continuous operation of services and applications. VMware vSphere Virtualization Platform allows you to use a cluster to operate virtual machines, VMs, and use vSphere High Availability, HA. This article describes vSphere High Availability, HA, configuration to help you become familiar with the configuration parameters. What is HA in VMware vSphere? VMware High Availability, HA, is an optional provisioning feature that can be used for vSphere VMs, including applications and services on VMs, to minimize downtime in the event of a failure. HA, or the ability of a virtual environment to withstand host failures, is one of the key reasons to choose to deploy VMware vCenter and a cluster as opposed to a standalone VMware ESX host. When HA is running on a VMware cluster, an agent is installed on each host participating in the cluster. Each host agent communicates with each other and monitors the connectivity of hosts in the cluster through heartbeat. If about 15 seconds pass without receiving a heartbeat from a certain host and ping to the host also fails, that host is determined to be having an error. VMs running on the failed host's computer/memory resources are not transferred to the healthy host and restarted on that host. HA in vSphere can check the hardware health of hosts to proactively move VMs away from hosts with hardware problems. There is also a provision for reboots and orchestration of actions in HA and, therefore, VMs are assigned to come online before other VMs in case of failover. These features are available in VMware vSphere 6.7 and vSphere 7. 2. VMware cluster requirements. Some requests from VMware to create a VMware cluster with HA enabled. Requirements include: hosts in the HA cluster must have a license for vSphere HA. VMware vSphere Standard or Enterprise Plus included vCenter standard license must be applied. 2 hosts are required to deploy HA. It is recommended to have more than 3 hosts. Static IP addresses are configured on each host. You need to have at least one common management network on the hosts. In order for VMs to run on all hosts in case they are moved to other hosts in the HA cluster, the hosts need to be configured on the same network and data store. Shared memory is required for HA. VMware Tools needs to run on the VMs being monitored in HA. 3. Steps to configure VMware HA. You can enable VMware HA while you are creating a cluster or when you already have a cluster created. In this vSphere HA configuration guide, we focus on HA configuration and we have already created the cluster. Use VMware vSphere 7 to perform VMware HA configuration steps. How to enable HA in VMware vSphere. To turn on HA in VMware vSphere in an existing cluster, perform the following steps. 1. Open VMware vSphere client in the web browser. 2. Go to Hosts and Clusters and redirect to your cluster. 3. Right-click on the cluster name in the Frame Navigator. 4. Click Settings in the menu. 7. Click vSphere Availability in section Services. There are 4 parts to vSphere HA installation. Failures and responses. Admission control. Heartbeat data stores. Advanced options. Let's look at vSphere HA configuration, which you can do by changing the settings in these sections. In the Failures and Responses section, tabs Failures and Responses used to customize HA cluster behavior and set what to do in different VM scenarios. Enable host monitoring. Enable this option to allow ESG hosts to exchange heartbeats within the cluster. A VMware vSphere HA cluster uses heartbeats to detect when any cluster component is unavailable. Turn it off when performing network maintenance to prevent migration and VM fault tolerance. Let's see all the settings in the tab Failures and Responses. Host failure response action when host fails. Failure response. Use these settings to set how the HA cluster responds to error conditions that occur on this cluster. Two modes are available. Disabled. Restart VMs. Virtual machines are restarted in a defined order in the event of host failure. Default VM restart priority. This setting is used to determine which group of virtual machines should be restarted first. There are 5 values in order from slowest to highest, lowest, low, medium, high, and highest. Virtual machines are rebooted based on priority, one group at a time. VM dependency restart condition. Select the condition that, when encountered, the cluster detects that VMs have been successfully rebooted and can reboot subsequent VMs. 4 conditions are available. Resources allocated, allocated resources. Powered on. Guest heartbeats detected, detects current heartbeats. App heartbeats detected, detects application beats. Response for host isolation, action to remove host. Option host isolation response allows you to set the behavior of an HA cluster when the ESG host continues to run but has no administrative network connection. Disabled. Power off and restart VMs. Shut down and restart VMs. Data store with PDL is written in full as data store with permanent device loss PDL, acting on frequent device loss data store errors. Settings are configured to detect data store inaccessibility by ESG hosts and initiate automatic failover of affected VMs. There are 3 modes for this vSphere HA configuration. Disabled. Issue events. Power off and restart VMs. Data store with APD. All paths down, APD, failure response is a condition to allow the cluster to act again when all paths fail down, lost connection, and there is no indication whether this is a temporary or permanent loss of connection to the device. There are 4 settings. Disabled. Issue events. Power off and restart VMs, conservative restart policy. Power off and restart VMs, flexible restart policy. Response recovery. There are 2 options. Disabled. Reset VMs. You can set an interruption period of several minutes before the recovery response. VM monitoring or virtual machine monitoring. Enable heartbeat monitoring. Enable heartbeat monitoring for servers using VMware tools running on them. You can also configure device monitoring using these available methods. If a VM heartbeat is not received for a period of time, a VM reboot is initiated. There are 3 options for VMware cluster configuration settings. Disabled. VM monitoring only. VM and application monitoring. VM monitoring sensitivity, used to set the time after which the VM is rated as no longer available and the HA cluster can begin restarting the VM. Presets. You can move the value slider from low to high. Custom. Option to set parameters, including failure interval, maximum uptime and maximum number of resets per VM. In the Admission Control section. Admission control is a policy used to ensure sufficient resources are reserved to run VMs during failover in a VMware HA cluster. Admission control settings ensure failover capability. If an action violates these settings, that action will not be allowed. Prohibited actions include starting a VM, migrating a VM, and installing additional CPU or memory to the VM. Admission control determined how many failures in an HA cluster are acceptable. And still be able to failover VMs, guaranteed for failover of virtual machines. You can determine host failover capacity by cluster resource percentage, cluster resource ratio. Dedicated failover hosts, hosts reserved for backup. Slot policy, policy for slot. If you turn it off admission control, however, you cannot guarantee the number of VMs that will be restarted in an HA cluster upon failover. Performance degradation VMs tolerated. Performance degradation is acceptable for the VM. This setting is intended to determine the performance degradation that the cluster can tolerate. 0% means the same level of VM performance must be guaranteed after a VM failover or reboot. Otherwise, a warning will appear. 100% of the time the warning is turned off and the cluster tries to restart the VM in many ways. In the Heartbeat Data Stores section. Heartbeat Data Stores provides a secondary option to monitor the availability of ESC hosts using the data store if network connectivity to ESC hosts is not possible and the management network fails. This approach allows vSphere to distinguish between host errors and host availability across the network environment. Use Heartbeat Data Stores in the VMware HA configuration to check hosts when an HA network fails. Heartbeat Data Stores selection policy has the following contents. Automatically select data stores accessible from the host. Automatically select data stores accessible from the host. Use data stores only from the specified list. Only use data stores from the specified list. Use data stores from the specified list and complement automatically if needed. Use data stores from the specified list and complement automatically if necessary. When clicked OK, the VMware cluster is reconfigured for the HA settings you previously configured. 2/VMware vSphere Proactive HA, Active BP. Proactive HA is a feature to make a cluster react to a problem before an error occurs across all ESC hosts and VMs residing on that host. Problems can occur with different components of an ESC server when vSphere Proactive HA can detect the hardware conditions of a server. For example, Proactive HA may be notified that there is a problem with the power supply to the ESC server. Virtual machines continue to run on this server, but problems can soon lead to server failure. To prevent VMs from occurring, vSphere Proactive HA can initiate a VM migration to another ESC host of a cluster. Proactive HA helps respond to power, fan, storage, memory, and network issues. You need to enable and configure DRS in the vSphere cluster before you can enable Proactive HA. You can configure vSphere HA and DRS together for a cluster.